All right, I think we're ready to go. Appreciate folks waiting for a little bit there. We're waiting for folks to trickle in here. I realize everyone's busy and oftentimes in back-to-back meetings, but welcome to today's webinar, the Composable CDP, how to level up your customer engagement. I'm super excited to be featuring Actable in today's webinar as one of our partners. And this is part of an ongoing series actually that MessageGears has been running really since about last August. We've been digging into various topics related to composability and CDP and customer engagement use cases. So super excited for today's session, and you can count on us to continue delivering this kind of content really for the rest of the year and beyond. Just some housekeeping tasks, normal things that you guys would expect. Recordings will be made available. We are going to have time at the end for Q&A, so please use the questions component in your webinar console to submit those. If they're housekeeping type things, we'll answer them in the console, but I also, Craig and I plan to have time at the end to actually address some of your questions live. So we look forward to that. And we do think today's session might run the full hour, depending on how wordy I get, and Craig's got a lot of really great content to share as well. So we might tuck in at 50 minutes, but hopefully some of you are multitasking or eating lunch and listening or watching us while you're doing it. Appreciate that. And yeah, those are the housekeeping things. In terms of who I am, I'm Walter Rowland. I run our partnerships function and team at MessageGears. If you guys don't know who we are, we call ourselves the only warehouse native customer engagement platform built for enterprise brands that market to millions of customers. So that means we work with global brands who have millions of customers of their own, really millions or tens of millions. And the common thread with those brands is they tend to store the data about those customers in a modern data warehouse that is owned and managed by the brand themselves or a trusted advisor. Sometimes Actable could be one of those trusted advisors. And we'll talk about some of that today. In terms of who Actable is, super thrilled to have them joining us today. I would think of Actable as an expert in customer data and CDP related advisory. Think of them as a consultancy, and they're certainly a MessageGears partner. What's really cool about Actable is they're made up of martech and ad tech industry veterans, so a very seasoned team, and that definitely includes our speaker today, Craig Howard. It's funny, Craig, I knew of you long before I knew you, and we're super lucky to have you today. For those of you that are not familiar with Craig's background, I think he started out his career back at Accenture, which is a great proving ground for so many folks in this industry. Then he went through DoubleClick and Epsilon, and really cut his teeth for I think 13 plus years at Merkle, and he's now at Actable and probably has been there for coming up on a year or maybe longer. So we're super lucky to have Craig today. He and his team have been advising clients in the customer acquisition, retention, loyalty, marketing cloud, CRM, CDP space, and a lot of acronyms there. But Craig, I'm going to say it's been 15 plus years for you. So that's, again, we're really lucky to have you. What's also cool about Actable today is they're kind of a twofer in terms of how we think about them. They're not only a martech consultancy, CDP consultancy, but they have a product. They have a product that specializes in predictive models. It's called Predictable, and you're going to hear about that today as well, in terms of how that can help marketers with things like propensity and other related predictive scores, and how that can be delivered right back to the brand's data cloud, data warehouse, as part of a composable CDP model. So that, I didn't advance my slide, shame on me. And you also get to see our faces. I should have had this up while I was introducing you, Craig, apologies for that. So these are our speakers today, and you're hearing my voice now. I'm Walter. In terms of what we're gonna cover, We're really going to dig into what the heck is Composable CDP and what are the benefits. You're going to hear MessageGears perspectives on that, and then you're going to hear Actable. And then Actable is going to dig into really this predictive component of the overall Composable CDP model and help educate all of our attendees on trends and best practices in those areas. You're going to hear about some success stories, and then we're going to have a recap and some time for Q&A. So super excited, and like I said, a packed agenda. Was talking with our speakers right before I joined and turned the webinar live today, and really wanted to kind of frame the conversation with the definition for starters. So I'm not going to read this out loud, but I am going to highlight, I think, some key concepts in terms of Composable CDP as a framework. And I will say the going in assumption to today's webinar is that CDP is a relatively known construct for many of you guys that are attending or listening to this post facto. CDP stands for Customer Data Platform. It is probably a 4 or 5 year old term, and it really refers to a set of capabilities that we're going to go through in today's webinar. When we say composable, we really mean a modular best of breed approach that typically is from multiple solution providers, but the core foundation of the whole thing is the brand's data warehouse or data cloud. So that is the heart of the Composable CDP model. And then everything else that is around the Composable CDP model either feeds the brand's data warehouse or sits directly on top of it as a connected application. And you're going to hear a little bit about connected applications as well in this webinar in terms of the concept of those connected apps have no customer data cloud of their own. Rather, they use the brand's data warehouse or data cloud to power all of the connected app use cases. So really, it's the brand's data cloud that is being used by the connected app to process and store data. And then the final thing I'll say is CDP capabilities are increasingly inclusive of customer engagement capabilities. So really, we're seeing kind of CDP and customer engagement / marketing cloud convergence. And so you should think of that when we're talking today, like we're using CDP as kind of inclusive of customer engagement. So why the heck are we even talking about Composable to begin with? And this actually ties into some of MessageGears' roots as a company. But really what's been going on over the last, well, really it goes back almost 10 years, but it's been accelerating over the last 5, is just a radical transformation in the data warehouse layer itself. And it goes back to the days of Hadoop and then was accelerated by platforms like Redshift and now Snowflake and Databricks and BigQuery and others. But I love this quote from the CEO of Snowflake from last August, because this speaks to really the trend that's happening across the entire kind of data cloud, data warehouse ecosystem. And this notion of the data no longer has to be moved to the work, but rather the work can come to the data. And that is a really key concept to keep in mind in the construct of Composable CDP. What's happening is the data cloud itself has become so performant and so elastic over the last, like I said, 10 years, but really accelerating over the last 5, that you actually can leverage the data cloud itself, i.e. the data warehouse, to power all kinds of use cases. But for the purposes of today's conversation, we're going to be zeroing in on sort of customer data platform and data activation use cases. So this next quote from Tarek over at Snowflake as well is just speaking to the trends that result from this data warehouse, data cloud transformation. So because the data cloud / data warehouse has become so performant and elastic, you actually can build applications that run on top of it. And that is a major shift in the way that martech is built that results in really disruptive and transformative business impact in areas such as agility and cost and data security that result in much more meaningful and timely and impactful customer experiences that lead to more loyalty and share of wallet and revenue for large brands that have adopted these kinds of models. So what's a drill down on that model specifically? You know, what are we talking about? Well, this is a visual depiction of this transformation. So you're seeing a shift from traditional SaaS, which has been around for 20 years now, which is kind of crazy to think about, but traditional SaaS deployment models require brands to copy and map their data to the third-party SaaS provider's cloud. So in the martech space, that can be pretty painful, right? If you've got all your data about your customers living in a modern data cloud like Snowflake or BigQuery or Redshift or Azure or Databricks or others, and you're using traditional martech for CDP or customer engagement use cases, you're dealing with a lot of friction. You're having to copy and map data back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that becomes particularly painful when you start doing things like running propensity models, which is what Craig's going to be talking about, among other things, here in just a bit. So what's emerged over the last 5+ years, and MessageGears, you know, transparently is one of the originators of this, you know, before my time, frankly, but our founding leadership saw this trend and built a new breed of martech to address it. But what you're seeing here is this notion of the martech just runs on top of the brand's data warehouse. And Predictable, which is a product from Actable that you hear about today, is another one that does the exact same thing. They run on top of and feed the brand's data cloud. So this is very disruptive and transformative stuff that leads to pretty significant benefits that I'll talk about in just a second. So given that construct, many brands have invested in modern data warehouses for customer data, for Customer 360, things like customer demographic tables and, you know, purchase history and behavioral data, all living in a centralized data warehouse with, you know, uniform identity resolution. Many brands are moving down the path of doing this, where all their data is centralized in a proprietary data warehouse or data cloud, but they're still having to copy and map and maintain versions of that data across all kinds of traditional SaaS martech platforms, CDPs, ESPs, segmentation tools, mobile messaging platforms. And as you can imagine, this is full of cost and friction, and ultimately is limiting the ability for brands to drive meaningful, timely customer experiences that really differentiate the brand and build more loyalty. So what we're talking about today is a total paradigm shift, in essence, where you move from a spaghetti tangled web of third-party SaaS providers and data copies all over the place to a more connected app model, where your data cloud or your data warehouse is the heart of the composable CDP construct, and then everything just connects to it or feeds it, as I mentioned earlier. So if you drill one level down on that concept, and then I'll transition to Craig, this is kind of what we're talking about here in terms of a set of capabilities. And some of you who have been following MessageGears have seen this kind of construct from us before, and I should mention that it is not proprietary to MessageGears. This is very much informed by folks like the CDP Institute and Gartner and Forrester and other analysts. You know, this is a common set of CDP and customer engagement pillars. That's what the 6 vertical pillars are: data collection, identity, transformation enrichment, machine learning, which you're going to hear about today from Predictable and Actable together, segmentation, orchestration, campaign, native channel execution, and third-party channel activation. That's squarely where MessageGears plays, for those of you that are not familiar with us. And one thing to mention about MessageGears that's really important to know is that when we say native channel execution, we mean that MessageGears is in fact an ESP. We're an ESP that deploys as a connected app on top of a brand's existing data cloud, and delivers billions of email push, SMS, and in-app experiences. So that makes us pretty unique relative to the ecosystem. And then finally, we've been activating audiences on third-party endpoints for 5+ years. That sometimes is called reverse ETL these days. We didn't start out calling it that, but it is absolutely what MessageGears is doing. We are taking first-party audiences out of a brand's data cloud and delivering them to endpoints like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, call center, direct mail, the list goes on and on. So this is a good construct, I think, to think about Composable CDP. Again, we're going to be drilling down on predictive machine learning and propensity today. You'll see also this notion of data sharing and data clean rooms, which we could do a whole nother webinar on, but there's a lot of fascinating things happening in the areas of data sharing and data enrichment, tapping into a rich ecosystem of providers, such as the ones under the marketplace pillar on this reference architecture. And then you'll also notice that we have dashboarding and reporting and analytics living in the brand's data cloud. And that makes intellectual sense because all of the data that Predictable is generating lives in the brand's data cloud. And for MessageGears, all the data that we capture through our endpoints goes back into the brand's data cloud. So really the data cloud itself is where you want to do your multi-touch attribution and other related types of reporting, analytics, and dashboarding. And then finally, you'll notice across the bottom, we've got Actable as a consultancy, really helping brands really figure out the right strategy to address these 6 capability pillars and all the various components and decisions that need to be made within it. So we're super excited to have them today, and that's how you should think about Actable, is that martech advisory layer across these 6 pillars, and then they're unique, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of their predictive, predictable product. So that's it for me until the end, but I will leave it with a benefits slide, which I transparently forgot about, but I do think it's important to touch on this, and then I will finally transition to you, Craig. Sorry, buddy. If you think about composable models and the benefits to marketers and martech and data leadership and CMOs, what are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about easier to deploy. We're just plugging into existing data models that already exist that are proprietary to the brand that live in their data cloud. That is a much, much, much easier deployment and migration model. You're talking about agility to dream and do. I can activate a propensity model immediately in this kind of model, and Craig will be talking about that. The TCO goes down, both operational and CapEx expenditures decline with this kind of model. Data security, is, your PII never leaves your data cloud. That's super important for almost everybody these days. So we are really seeing that composable models with data cloud, data warehouse at the foundation really can be transformative for enterprise brands. So that is a great transition to Craig. And Craig, we're gonna see a screen flicker, and then you're gonna take over.
All right. Thank you very much, Walter, for the introduction and for allowing us to participate in this conversation. I love your visual there around your reference architecture. Of course, everybody's got to have their own, right? And we have a similar but different approach to representing really the capabilities within that composable technology stack. In Actable, we use this as a vehicle to really help organizations understand what they have, what they need to support their business through these capabilities. And you don't see acronyms in here like CDP or DMP or things like that. It's about capabilities, and the way that we organize them is along these 3 layers: data, which is where your customer data resides, where you solve for things like Customer 360, and as well as the content and the assets that you need to leverage within creating experiences. The decisioning layer, this is what helps you determine who to talk to, how to talk to them, and how to understand what's working, what's not working, and how to optimize the way that you're targeting and ultimately communicating with your customers and prospects. And then the delivery layer, that's where the experiences are actually created, outbound messaging, like what MessageGears can provide. And within your composable stack, when you think about composable commerce, right, that's an important part of your overall tech stack as well. And composability is a key principle that we're seeing evolve in that space as well. Now, when we think about the concept of a package CDP, what you see is a subset of those overall capabilities that we typically find in a package CDP. Everyone is a different collection of capabilities, of course, so this is general. But what you see here are really, the common capabilities that you're going to see within a package CDP. And those platforms were especially useful when organizations lacked the ability to implement their own cloud-native customer data store. And they could purchase this, commercial off-the-shelf solution, package CDP, and that could help them realize the benefits of cloud technologies that are behind those package CDP offerings to help them manage their customer data, in addition to supporting their orchestration and some of their insight needs, as well as activation in many cases through messaging or even through site personalization capabilities. But things have evolved since then, right? And really what's changed here is that organizations have matured and they've evolved and they've built skills around those technologies to the point where they can start to think about being comfortable deploying that capability on their own within a data cloud. In addition, as the data clouds have built momentum, there's more and more tools and technologies that play nicely within those ecosystems that integrate very well, that are easier to deploy, and has eased the burden on IT to build an overall solution within a data cloud ecosystem. The other thing that's happened, in many of you, if you have a CDP in place today, a package CDP, you may have discovered this depending on your provider, is that data integration needs have started to go beyond what some of the platforms can ultimately support. And oftentimes they'll struggle to manage complex data structures, handle, answering complex questions of the data. In addition to that, there's been, as you think about customer data store and what it does to support the organization, CDPs are typically focused on activation, and as organizations realize they need that data asset, that integrated data asset to support other things, other consumers within the organization, like their analytics team, their data science team. They have reports and dashboards they need to create. They need to federate data broadly throughout their entire technology ecosystem. That's where they start to see that there's another option here that may make more sense for them based on their needs. Now that said, package CDPs still have an important role to play for a lot of organizations. You may not be ready or have the team that can successfully implement the solution within the data cloud, or your needs may be served just fine by a package CDP. So I'm not here to say that those are bad options. They're certainly not. Just talking about the differences here and help you think about maybe what makes the most sense for your organization. So what's happening now, and maybe you hear a lot of this noise in the market, is that brands are creating that single customer view in that cloud native environment where they can find cloud native identity resolution and data integration tools. And really what's happening here is effectively that in that part of the overall architecture, that data layer is for the most part, not entirely, is split off and being handled by that data cloud environment. And what's left is that the package CDPs are then responsible for the decisioning and, to a degree, the delivery piece of that. So they're letting go of their data responsibilities, which is interesting because this was undeniably the one common capability across all CDPs. So they're effectively letting go of the customer data aspect of it and allowing that to happen within the data environment, and really now becoming more of an orchestration tool, which is not unlike the pattern. I think you said, Walter, like CDP's been around 5 or 6 years now. Some people are calling them legacy CDPs, which is kind of funny because it's still a relatively new concept. But even before that, this pattern existed, right? We had campaign management tools that were sitting on top of databases. So this composable architecture isn't completely new. I think what's different is obviously the data cloud, the power of that, and the tools and technologies there. And then within the marketing ecosystem, there's a lot more variety around the channels that we need to integrate with. there's real-time considerations, right? So things have absolutely changed. So what the package CDP vendors are doing is great, right? They're changing the way that their applications are working, in that they're playing very nicely within these data clouds. What's not great about that is then, you know, in an already confusing market around CDP, now we have another confusing aspect around package versus composable. So for that reason, don't necessarily love the term, but seems it's here to stay. So we're here to hopefully provide some clarity on really what's happening and how to think about it. So to go away from the theoretical into a bit of the practical, here's an example of a composable architecture. This, for the most part, works on both Google Cloud as well as the Snowflake Data Cloud. One thing to notice here in this example is that I showed all those capabilities in that reference architecture. Most organizations don't need them all, right? Or certainly don't need them all at a maturity level, advanced maturity level. So you shouldn't feel like you need to figure out answers for all those capabilities. You likely don't. They need to be driven by your business's, objectives and ultimately what the level of maturity of those capabilities is really important also to consider in thinking about what your reference architecture should look like. The other important part of this architecture is that all these tools are interoperable, right? They fit into this composable architecture. And you see, for example, MessageGears segment, MessageGears message that Walter talked about earlier as supporting some of those capabilities. And you see the product that Actable has created called Predictable for predictive modeling. And again, Walter talked about connected applications, right? That's really important in these ecosystems for you to be able to plug and play these different modules. And Predictable we'll talk about a little bit later. Predictable is a connected app. It's in the Snowflake powered by Snowflake directory, and it's also within the Google Marketplace. And let's offer up, if anybody wants to discuss the details of this architecture or discuss your particular architecture, please reach out. Happy to drill in. Here's a pretty high level comparison, and again, there's always exceptions to the rules here, but I want to give you a general guidance on some of the difference between a package CDP and a composable architecture. A couple examples here to highlight, and again, you'll have access to this after the webinar to take a look more closely. Implementation is typically 90 days or more with a package CDP. That's much faster with a composable approach, where you're hooking in an engagement platform or a data activation platform into your existing database. That's going to allow you to make use of that data much faster. However, don't forget, there's a lot of hard work in creating that data asset. You need to be diligent about how you're collecting data, how you're handling identity resolution to stitch all your data together, to create that single customer view. You've got to be thinking about data quality, data taxonomies. It's a hard problem to solve, so don't think this is necessarily the easy button. There's still a lot of work to do on that end. From a data collection standpoint, a lot of package CDPs out there are handling a lot of this for you, as well as even capturing data that's important in how you're activating in a proprietary way, and oftentimes in real time. On the composable architecture approach, really you're a slave to what's in that data store that you're connecting to directly. So a little bit of a difference that you may see there. Data governance, and I think Walter talked about this as well around the advantages of composable, or you're going to be very deliberate in how you're approaching your data governance and controls. That diligence you're taking in a packaged approach, you have to kind of replicate and think about, am I on par with what I've done there? So in a composable architecture, you don't have to think about that kind of a concern. And then, lastly, around data science and machine learning. You can find machine learning capabilities within package CDPs. You have to pay very close attention to what that actually is, and to the degree that it supports what you're trying to do. On the composable side, of course, you've got to build these capabilities out within your organization, within the data cloud. So as we think about machine learning, there's some choices to make here. Where should you focus your efforts? So as I mentioned, package CDPs, have capabilities. They may be limited, and they may not be purpose built for your particular use cases. At least they exist. They're a good way to accelerate some machine learning, but ultimately what we see is you reach a point where they're not completely supporting your use cases, or fully supporting use cases in maybe the depth or breadth of data that can fuel that machine learning problem, whether it's predicting churn or perhaps trying to understand lifetime value. You have to be very sure that the data that's fueling those predictive models is sufficient in that it's going to give you truly the best predictive outcome with what it's telling you. We also see a lot of challenges in the inventory of options that are out there. So we're seeing more and more. Pay very close attention to those that are focused on marketing use cases as opposed to just composable machine learning capabilities. I think we'll see more and more of those pop up over time, but right now there's a limited set of choices there. And then lastly, ML is tough, right? And not every organization is ready to accomplish that and accomplish that in a fast way. So if you're looking for speed analytics, that's where a composable approach is going to be a little bit better. The things that we see within organizations that are struggling, they're varied, but ultimately you see challenges around the infrastructure that they have, collaborating with the IT organization, having the skill sets on hand within the staff to be able to deliver this type of a capability and to deliver it fast. And organizational, like anything, organizational blockers that get in the way from deploying this kind of capability effectively, ultimately leads to poor results. That's not to say that some organizations don't do this well. They certainly do, and have large organizations that are supporting this. But for those that don't, there's a better option there, right? And it's really about this new model we're talking about with the composable architecture, where we're ultimately, it's about alleviating the friction, right? Making it easy to deploy, making it easy to plug in these different modules, these different capabilities, and anchored on the marketer's database at the center of that ecosystem. And when you can do that, you can really start to drive growth. And that's what it's about, right? So we're organizing the data in this environment, we're enabling the analytics. Again, your customer data serves more than just activation purposes. You've got to support the data science community via analytics. You got to build reports, and you have to continue to optimize what you're doing and have the ability to integrate a measurement approach into all that you're doing around your customer data. If you can do that, then you're going to have a better chance to really start to drive growth within your organization. So let's talk a little bit about machine learning and some of the typical predictive models that we see. And again, you can take a look at this afterwards, but we'll highlight a couple of examples here. So one common model around propensity is purchase propensity. So who's likely to purchase, and if you know those people that are more likely to purchase, you can build lookalike audiences of based off of that seed audience. You can do that within media. You could also do that by leveraging third-party data. If we think about churn propensity, right? Somebody who's gonna you could be canceling a subscription, it could be just going inactive. There's a common use case in media for acquisition around optimizing spend, right? It's very basic, where you're just going to suppress your current customers so you're not spending money on them, obviously. Well, there's an analog there around churn to optimize spend. So just suppressing those that are likely to churn from your retention marketing efforts within paid media is a great use case to see some business benefits around. Another common model, and this is also part of the predictable suite, is around next purchase. Could be second purchase, could be any subsequent purchase ultimately. If you understand who's most likely to make that next purchase, you could do things like reduce the discount that you're going to offer them, or maybe even adjust the offer that you're going to put in front of them, because they were on their way to making that purchase anyways, right? Another great predictive model is around a recommender. Commonly people are thinking about product recommendations. It's a great use case, but it could also be content. It could be looking at offers historically and determining what's the best offer to put in front of somebody. Easily incorporated within site and email personalization use cases, but it can also be an interesting way to understand maybe how to bundle products together and how to position those in front of customers as well. So let's talk about some real world results. This is a customer that has been using Predictable, and they were really struggling with just single purchasers, these one and done customers. Yet they're sitting on a lot of information behind their customer base and ultimately what they were purchasing, and just not making use of that to influence how they're deciding what they're making decisions around their marketing strategy. What we were able to do with predictive modeling capability is very quickly deploy that capability and build on top of their first party data, use the machine learning and score that customer base, and then syndicate those scores to the platforms that can make use of them, and obviously as part of their marketing channel mix. And after that first purchase, they could be we targeted them with email, within paid social, and obviously putting a measurement approach to understand obviously what's working. You want to validate that those that are coming, that are being determined as a high propensity are actually delivering the value that we expected, and that's exactly what we see in the results, where we saw 2 times the rate in the high propensity group than the lower propensity group. In addition, we were able to use that information to optimize the content on those model insights, and ultimately this resulted into pretty big impact, 8 figures from a dollar standpoint. So very, very successful story there. Excuse me. So a bit about predictable, which we talked about. Those 4 models are part of the suite. There's an additional couple of models, and we're continuing to evolve that product to not only have more predictive models as part of the suite, but also into industry specific models. So as we do a lot of that work for, from a custom standpoint on the Actable consulting side, and then obviously it's been a lot of the intelligence that we've used to fuel the predictable product, which is an end-to-end suite of predictive models, right? And what that means is that it handles from data capture through the model training that is bespoke to your organization, can be configured based on what makes sense for you, whether it's the look back window for training, how often it trains, how often it scores. That's all configurable, and then ultimately feeds that back into the source of record for all that data, which is and in many cases that cloud-based data warehouse environment. In addition, we provide some insights on top of that data, understanding the model diagnostics, as well as some basic understanding around the behavioral data that fuels the predictive modeling engine, which ends up being pretty revealing, and then allows you to think about some other insights that you might derive from your data. As I mentioned, Predictable is a connected app. It's available in the Powered by Snowflake directory. It's available in the Google Marketplace directory. This is your speed to analytics module. It's marketer friendly, right? You don't need your data science team to deploy this. And we can snap it into your ecosystem, and you can within days really get a lot of those predictive model scores back into your environment so that you can start to use that. We can help you. We've got a set of common use cases. You saw some examples there that we can help you to really accelerate the usage of that environment. But ultimately, this is about speed, right? It's about giving you a way to snap this into your composable architecture and start to just derive more value from your customer data to really optimize what you're doing within your marketing programs.
Wow, Craig, we did well, you and I. I was worried we would run up to the full hour, but here we are with 20 minutes to spare and a little time for Q&A. But I did want to bring it back together, and Craig, that was fantastic, by the way. A lot of meat in your slides and some great stories there. Just to bring it all back together, if you think about Actable as a martech consultancy helping brands navigate composable versus packaged use cases, and we couldn't agree more. Composable isn't for everyone. There are great packaged use cases, and we advise brands on that path as MessageGears all the time, to be transparent. But for brands that are going down this path of leveraging modern data warehouses, now known as data clouds, for centralization of customer data for all kinds of use cases, the composable model definitely is worthy of examination. And, you know, when you think about the story that Craig just told with predictive models coming out of Predictable and landing adjacent to customer data in the brand's data cloud, what's powerful about the composable model from a MessageGears perspective is you can immediately segment against and activate that customer data that now has predictive scores adjacent to it that are driving either segmentation decisioning or personalization decisioning. And just to be specific, personalization is, you know, what offer does Craig see or not see, hypothetically, on a given channel. That's an example of a personalization use case. In the land of email, MessageGears thinks about that in terms of, you know, it's one template going out to 40 million people, but the content modules in each template are actually different depending on the recipient. And a lot of times that those content modules are driven by propensity scores coming from solutions like Predictable. So I wanted to kind of take it down a level for our attendees in terms of understanding how all these pieces come together, where you've got the data cloud at the heart, you've got Predictable feeding it with propensity, and you've got tools like MessageGears that are segmenting and activating it across channels. So you can imagine the agility that comes from this, not only in terms of the predictive models and the agility there, but also the segment and activation agility, which, you know, for many brands, as we talked about at the beginning of this session, is really, really hard because they might be using a tool like Predictable to do propensity models that are generating scores that land in the brand's data cloud, but then they have to get those scores published to traditional marketing cloud solution providers, and that is a data mapping and data syncing exercise that can frankly be very expensive and very painful and take weeks or sometimes months to even put into place. So a lot of that relates to kind of like the transformation that's happening, that's been happening, that's accelerating, where the composable architecture just really creates disruptive value in terms of delivering more timely and relevant customer experiences. So that's my attempt at a closing, but we do have some good questions, Craig. A lot of these are going to be for you. Some of them are actually related to the use cases set of slides around predictability that you talked about, which I loved. But we do have one question, which I think is interesting to see because MessageGears is starting to see this ourselves with our own customers and to some extent prospects. This notion of acquisition lookalikes. So I guess the question here might be, Craig, you know, could you kind of dive into that use case in a little bit more detail in terms of what you guys are seeing around using first-party data and predictive modeling for acquisition use cases? I think we'd love to hear you comment on that to the extent that you're able to.
Yeah, and I think, you know, so obviously your first-party data is telling you a lot about your current customers, what they do, what they like, what they're interested in, what their intent is. So when we think about lookalikes, there's a couple scenarios. One is leveraging the lookalike capability within a downstream platform like Google Marketing Platform, right? So Google Marketing Platform has the ability to target lookalikes within their ecosystem, but you have to tell them who you want those people to look like, right? And that's what that audience can drive. Another good use case around lookalikes is leveraging third-party data, known third-party data. So moving away from, you know, maybe what you might have seen within like a DMP in the past, and then using your first-party data to then understand within that third-party data set who looks like that audience or that particular segment that you're interested in, and then targeting that third-party data universe accordingly. And you have to obviously be careful about consent and things like that, depending on the channel, right? There's limitations on what you can do channel by channel, but of course that's another good use case for leveraging that predictive output to define a particular audience to then transfer into one of those other mechanisms that I talked about.
Perfect. Yeah, that's interesting. It's very much in line with what we're seeing, although I'd say we're seeing more the second use case these days for whatever reason, which is this notion of taking our first-party data running propensity models against it, determine, future high value customer propensity, and then taking that audience of 6 million or whatever it is, onboarding it to a third party provider that can help you find another 30 million that look like that 6 million, right? And again, respecting consent and channel activation rules that flow from that you mentioned, Craig. But I think that's been a fascinating thing we're starting to see on the MessageGears side of things in terms of ad tech, martech convergence. To some extent, you're seeing martech informing customer acquisition use cases in kind of an ad tech DMP type context. So
I'm sorry. I was going to bring it back to the composable architecture, right? Within those ecosystems, there's identity resolution providers that are also giving you the ability to leverage third-party data and helps make that very easy by taking your customer data, solving for identity resolution, and then as well being able to understand, who those people are within their third-party data set, and then use that data enrichment capability that they also provide to drive some of those use cases. So again, composable architecture is really embracing these use cases with capability.
Yeah. No, you nailed it. That's absolutely correct. And that touches on another one of the kind of composable CDP pillars, at least from the message, well, you had it too, which is this notion of data enrichment and identity. I will say what we're seeing increasingly is brands are solving for first-party identity resolution oftentimes themselves. And what I mean by that is they're just running deterministic models to say these 4 versions of Walter are in fact the same. They're doing that really to save money, right? They're saying, okay, before we use a third-party identity provider, let's clean up our own data such that we move from 80 million to 65 million or whatever, whatever the deduping process is. And then with the 65 million, let's tap into a third party for all kinds of use cases. Identity enrichment, data enrichment being one of them, which again is highly disruptive in terms of the ability for, I don't know, I always tell a story about a warranty claims home warranty provider that we work with, where they're able to enrich data in near real time to enable them to deliver a more accurate home warranty quote to a consumer who's initiated an inquiry, right? So it's like for a home warranty provider to generate a quote, they need a lot of data, and the consumer, it's a pain in the neck for the consumer to provide all that data. So increasingly, the home warranty providers are able to get that data enrichment through data marketplace providers that are connected to the brand's data cloud in near real time. So it's just, anyway, I'm kind of rambling a little bit. Another use case that's come up in the Q&A, which maybe I just touched on, maybe I didn't, Craig, sorry. This notion of paid media suppression, that one, can you pontificate on that one a little bit more in terms of giving us a little more depth in what you're seeing around paid media suppression type use cases?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most common use cases that we've seen in the past is just, leveraging first-party data in your paid media program by not spending money on, typically paid media is very acquisition focused, not spending those acquisition dollars on targeting people that you already have a relationship with, right? The example that I gave was around, expanding that a little bit to suppressing those that are likely to churn. So if they're likely to churn, spending dollars on putting ads in front of them is probably not going to make a difference, so why spend that money? It's just another extension of that.
Love that. And in today's macro environment, these kinds of use cases are pretty relevant. Very cool. Okay, a couple other ones. I'm going to run us for probably another 5 minutes or so. Understand if people have to drop, but the Q&A is so valuable, Craig, with someone like yourself. This is a good one. How do you handle data quality issues in a composable environment? Which is, probably the same as how do you handle data quality issues in a packaged environment, but what are you guys seeing, and then I can pontificate on what we're seeing as well across our brands in terms of data quality from a customer 360 perspective, I'm assuming is the context here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental thing to understand is like data quality never goes away. No piece of software is ever going to solve it for you, and it's it's going to continue to always be a problem, right? In the package CDP pattern, right, what we typically saw was because the data quality or data manipulation, data transformation capabilities are generally limited within CDPs themselves. They're not any form of like enterprise, ETL tool or transformation tool. You had to do a lot of that work up front before you fed the CDP, right? So that changes when you're in a data cloud environment where all that work around data management is happening there. Everything from your data collection to your data transformation, your application of business rules, how you're integrating and standardizing and normalizing that data is all happening there. And then all the consumers are benefiting from that data quality work that you're doing. And we talked a little bit about that. It's not just about activation, it's about your data science community, your analytics, the reports you're building, whoever's needs to benefit from that single customer view you've built within that environment. But of course, it's only that data is only as good as the data quality that's applied to it in constructing that single customer view. So there's obviously plenty of options around how you solve for that, of course, but don't minimize that, right? Because if you don't do a good job there, you're ultimately your predictive models are not going to be as effective, and your ability to create segments and understand who your customers are and talk to them is not going to be as powerful.
100%. Yeah, just to repeat back to you what I think you heard, and it's sort of what we're seeing is the thought and effort and frankly strategic advisory around data quality exists whether you're deploying a packaged or a composable model, in essence, right? Like you need to think through structures, inputs, outputs, no matter what. And obviously Actable as a consultancy is really good at helping brands figure this stuff out and come up with sort of crawl, walk, run approaches towards a lot of this stuff. The other thing I will say from a MessageGears perspective, which I find fascinating, is especially in like retail vertical industry, we're starting to see the emergence of relatively standardized approaches for about 80% of the use cases for customer and transaction and behavioral data. Like they're emerging sort of standards that are starting to go across brand. We sort of 80-20 rule where 80% is relatively normalized in terms of like, demographic tables and transaction tables and behavioral event tables. And then the other 20% tends to be proprietary to the brand, right? So there's always some unique wrinkles, but it's sort of the 80-20 rule, which of course we all love. And Snowflake in particular is got kind of a partner that is driving a lot of this called Roebling. That's kind of fascinating to watch. And the other thing that I think is happening is, to your point, Craig, the use cases are moving beyond just customer data and customer data activation, right? So if you think about C360 in a modern data cloud for brand X in this composable construct, that data typically already exists, frankly, but maybe is being used by other parts of the organization. That's number one. Like when we talk to brand X for the first time, typically we find that like some sort of C360 already exists. Maybe it was in Teradata and Netezza 5 years ago. Now it's in BigQuery or Snowflake, right? So the foundation's there. It might be used for other purposes other than marketing, but it's kind of sort of there. But then when you take C360, when it gets more mature, we're starting to see retailers in particular using that for things like store assortment planning and all kinds of other use cases that have nothing to do with kind of marketing to the customer, but have to do with the next set of products that we develop, where we put those products from a geography perspective if you have physical stores and e-com. And it's just fascinating to sort of see that emerging. So anyway, I'm rambling probably more than I should, but I wanted to give you kind of what MessageGears is seeing in areas of data quality and use cases that go beyond just customer marketing. Anything you want to comment on what I just said? have at it.
No, that's a great example. I mean, you know, customer data can power more than just obviously the customer experience, right? That's you know, first and foremost, but there's a lot of, you know, information you can glean from that if you do a good job of, you know, data quality and identity and stitching all together to then better drive other initiatives within your organization that are obviously always tied to your customer, right? So they could be operational in nature, like you mentioned. Yeah, I think that's again, you know, and just the point being the flexibility in use cases that can be built and enabled by a data cloud-based warehouse first approach to storing customer data.
Love it. Hey, final thing for you before we go. This one is a good one, and we hear this a lot too, and this one's a little bit softer, but it's this notion of, you know, a lot of this conversation today has been pretty darn technical, right? In a sense, like data warehouses and composable CDP and behavioral data and predictive models. So I'm a marketer, you know, I'm in a CRM role, maybe I'm a manager, analyst level. You know, what advice would you give them, this, you know, other than outcomes and benefits, like what's the future state career path and educational track for someone who's in their early career trajectory, but working inside of a big brand, focusing on customer engagement? Like what advice would you give them in terms of a lot of these more technical topics, and anything that comes off the top of your head in that area?
Yeah, I mean, try and stay close to the data, right? I think the tooling that's available today makes that a lot easier, and you don't have to be as technical as you used to be. That's the really good news there. So it's not as challenging of a prospect for some that are more business focused than technical focused. I think stay on top of trends, like participating in webinars like this to get through the confusion, right? Because things move fast, things are changing so quickly. The terminology is changing, the capabilities are changing, the ways in which we interact with consumers are changing. So there's a lot to stay on top of. So try and do the best you can to expose yourself to the subject matter experts out there and stay on top of, you know, the different publications and just be aware, right? That said, you know, as much as things change, a lot of things stay the same too, and it's just a matter of cutting through the vernacular, really understanding what it means in today's vernacular, but really tying back to the same principles that you've always seen.
Awesome. Yeah, and I would say just from a MessageGears perspective, you know, I think that partnership between the marketing leadership and team and frankly the technology and data leadership and team is so critical, right? Like try to, you know, if there's any sort of silos that may exist, try to work through those and create points of collaboration, because that's really where the magic happens, right? When you have strong partnership between sort of the customer retention and acquisition side of the organization with the data and technology leadership, pretty incredible things can happen in terms of transformative, you know, customer experiences. And obviously Actable plays a key role in helping brands navigate some of this and go down these more transformative paths. But, you know, we've seen not just incremental disruption, but transformative disruption on our side from some of these composable models. And you've talked about some unbelievable use cases today and case studies from what you guys are seeing. So that partnership, you know, to a mid-level marketer who's early in their career, get to know your data leadership would be what MessageGears would say.
Yeah, that's right. Get close to your IT friends and
Yeah.
your data science or marketing analytics friends, for sure. I mean, I think platforms like CDP forced the collaboration across marketing departments as we started thinking about centralizing audiences and everybody benefiting from that and away from channel silos. And now composable architectures are bringing IT and marketing together and forcing them to collaborate. So when I say get close to the data, like it means get close to those people as well, because they're the ones that are enabling you with that data.
And they'll teach you a lot. All right, well, cool. Look at that. We ate up the full hour. Craig, I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you.
Your firepower and experience and expertise. Super cool session. Look forward to doing more with you guys in the future. And I'm going to wrap it. It's top of the hour. Wish everyone a great rest of the week. And I know both Craig and I and the entire Actable and MessageGears team are here to support any of you and answer any questions you may have at any time. We're easy to find on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to find us. Cheers. Thanks again.
Thank you.